Whoa, whoa, whoa. Really, you should be suspicious. You don't want to be running and getting my autograph. You should suspect that I have agendas to continue to perpetuate the system of white supremacy, which is terrorism, as you said, against non-white people worldwide. I don't see any evidence of that at all with the non-white people that you speak with. Now, you can say that. I hope the people who are listening, I hope you will investigate. Speak to non-white people about Tim Wise and see what their response is. Even check out some of the people who have commented on this program when Mr. Wise has been here. See if they feel, Mr. Wise, I'm suspicious of him. I think he could be practicing racism, white supremacy, even though he sounds like he's against it. He sounds really good, but I'm suspicious. Investigate and see if that's the perspective that non-white people have about Mr. Wise. Before I move forward, I definitely want to make sure I point this out. You said you've been doing this for 20 years. I would think a white person, an admitted white supremacist, if they were really interested in replacing white supremacy with justice, they would be as gentle and kind as possible in speaking with a 10-year-old victim of white supremacy to make sure, regardless of the semantics and the word, what she asked, to make sure she overstands. Hey, I'm a white person. You should be suspicious. You should be suspicious of all white people, and to make sure she understands what it means to be racist. You can easily clear that up without an attitude. Again, you're white. You're not a victim. You're not being targeted by this system. There's no reason for you to have an attitude with any victim of white supremacy. There's no reason for you to be anything less than incredibly hospitable and courteous, regardless of the perspective that non-white people take about you or any other white person, as long as this system exists. And the fact that I don't see that makes me further suspicious of your work, and the fact that I really believe you're consciously, I strongly suspect you're consciously practicing racism, white supremacy in the work that you do, just by looking at the effect that you have on non-white people. I definitely want to move forward and get to my next question to continue this. What is your view on Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's theory of white genetic annihilation?
You want a full discussion of the Cress theory of color confrontation? Is that what you're asking?
Just what is your view on her theory of white genetic annihilation? What is your view of that theory?
Sure, a couple of things. First, I think that there is no question that for some people who are white in the system of white supremacy, that the fear of genetic annihilation is among the reasons, I'm not going to say it's the only one or even the most important one, but among the reasons why at a conscious or perhaps subconscious level they fear that, and that may be one of the reasons why they manifest white supremacist behavior. The only distinction that I would draw between what I've just said, or the differentiation between that, or the disagreement that I have, I guess, with the Cress theory, is that I do not believe it is accurate, nor do I believe there is one shred of evidence to suggest that the only or the overriding reason why all white people engage in racism, white supremacy, is that fear. And the reason I say that I disagree with that, which is my understanding of Dr. Welsing's belief, is that that is the overriding reason for white supremacy, is the fear of white genetic annihilation. The only reason I don't accept that that is the overriding reason for all white people is that for some whites there is an understanding and a recognition that race as a genetic thing is not real. As a biological thing, it is meaningless. Now, I happen to be one of those white people who does not believe that there is such a thing as white genes, because there isn't such a thing as white genes. There is no such a thing as white or black genetics that are separate and distinct from one another. But the fact that I reject that notion and therefore am not particularly concerned about quote-unquote genetic annihilation of whiteness, since after all, I can't be worried about that if I don't think there is such a thing as genetic whiteness. That does not mean, however, that I cannot be involved in the system of white supremacy, because there are other reasons other than that why white folks might want to maintain that system. Among them would be the simple fact that whiteness bestows certain privileges and advantages and has done so ever since European peoples began the process of conquest of other people's lands and other people's resources. So once that system is in place, white people might have several rationales for maintaining it that are not purely about genetics. So I agree with the idea that Dr. Welsing is putting forward, that is among the logical reasons why a white person might support that system, and that fear, look, for neo-Nazis that you talk to, for overt white supremacists who believe that race is a biological thing, that is absolutely what I think motivates them. She is on point. But I do not believe it is accurate to suggest that that is the overriding rationale or reason. Just like it's wrong when Marxists would say, and I've heard Dr. Welsing make the comment that she long ago rejected the Marxist argument, and I agree with her, that it's only class interest. I heard her say that at Fisk back, I believe, in 1997 or 98, and I agreed with her. It's not only about class interest, it's also not only about genetic annihilation. So I think her theory is partially true. It's just not explanatory for all whites.
I want to point this out also for our listeners. I've said this repeatedly, and I hope the program has evidenced this, at least this one point. White people tend to be extraordinarily informed about racism, white supremacy. I just want to point that out. I know tons of non-white people, victims of white supremacy, who have not read Dr. Welsing's work, are not familiar with her theory. Mr. Wise seems very knowledgeable. Heard her at Fisk. He seems very knowledgeable of her work, Mr. Fuller's work. Dr. Marimba Ani, very informed, admitted white supremacist. Mr. Wise, I just want to check, unless I have been misinformed, Dr. Welsing has been attempting counter-racist work for 40 years. She is a third-generation physician, a general and child psychiatrist, unless I've been misinformed. Do you have a doctorate in anything?
Oh, no, I don't, no.
Okay. Are you a physician?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Do you have a master's in anything?
No, I don't.
Okay. I'm just curious, checking your qualifications against a third-generation physician, general and child psychiatrist who's been doing this work for 40 years. You've been doing this work for 20 years with no doctorate, no PhD, no master's. You are not a physician.
Can I respond to that?
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
The theory of color confrontation, I've read her book. There is not a single academic or scientific footnote to prove her theory. Her theory is an excellent one, but it's not as if it is scholarly supported by academic literature or research. The fact that she is...
Hang on.
You weren't going to interrupt me, and now you are. So
hang on. I am interrupting you, sir, and this is important. And I'm also doing this because, as I said at the outset, it's very important. You have a tendency to be very long-winded, and I really want to try to get to as much information.
It was going to be short.
I am unfortunately going to have to interrupt you a few times, but if you say this is going to be short, I won't do it now. I apologize for interrupting this time. Please continue if this is going to be short.
I was just saying that the theory, which I think is a very interesting one, it's not as if that part of her theory is footnoted with reference to studies that have proven that to be true. When I heard her at Fisk, for example, her argument that was true was she was saying, well, I have talked to white supremacists who have admitted that that's what they are concerned about. That's not evidence. That's anecdotal. It's interesting. I'm simply saying that if you do not believe race is genetic, which I do not believe that it is, and all scientific evidence says it isn't, and Dr. Welsing does not contradict that. She doesn't say otherwise that I know of. If you don't think race is genetic, then you would not be afraid of genetic annihilation. You might be afraid of power annihilation, but you wouldn't necessarily be afraid of genetic annihilation. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. And I just, again, want to highlight we have someone who does not have a master's, does not have a PhD, does not have 40 years of experience as a general and child psychiatrist, who is making these comments about the work of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, my quote-unquote ideological mentor, according to the admitted white supremacist known as Tim Wise. I do want to point out, because you, in your letter, which I want to get to, you talked about duplicity. I do want to point this out. I talk about Tim Wise pretty much the same, regardless of whether I'm on the program, whether I'm at a meeting in Seattle, whether I'm outside. I pretty much talk about Tim Wise the same. You are always referenced as the admitted white supremacist known as Tim Wise. I'm not going to change up anything because you're here. I'm pretty open about how I feel about your work. I strongly suspect you are consciously practicing racism, white supremacy. I feel you are one of the most dangerous white people that I know of. I'm sure there are others, but you are very dangerous in my list. In fact, you are the standard that I measure suspected and admitted racists by. How close do I think they are to Tim Wise? No fear in my heart to tell you that anytime, any place on the planet, I hope you are at the White Privilege Conference, because I will be there. We can do it live in person, and I'll say the very same thing. I want to read from your letter where you talked about Dr. Frances Cress Welsing and quote unquote, and you can check me to make sure I'm reading it accurately. You said, it appears you haven't resisted this as much per se as Dr. Welsing's belief that homosexuality is a white-led plot to destroy black people. Pseudo-scientific bullshit, of course, which ignores homosexuality throughout hundreds of species, but which perhaps Dr. Welsing thinks Dr. Welsing thinks white folks implanted those in animals as well. This is from Tim Wise's letter written in March of 2009. And I just want to point out the difference in it. This seems very disrespectful, very condescending of someone who has a doctorate, a third-generation physician, general and child psychiatrist, criticism coming from someone who is not a psychiatrist, does not have 40 years of counter-racist work under their belt, does not have a doctorate in anything, is not a physician, doesn't even have a master's. This seems incredibly condescending and discourteous in the way he's speaking about Dr. Welsing in a letter that he wrote to me in comparison to what he just said. And I, again, want everyone to think about that. Why would a white person even care what Dr. Welsing has to say, or any other non-white person, particularly if it's rubbish? Whatever. Who cares what they're saying? My goal is to replace white supremacy with justice, not to point out the pseudo-scientific bullshit of a non-white person. Do you have a response to that, Mr. Wise?
I absolutely do. First of all, the theory of genetic annihilation is distinct from the discussion about homosexuality in her book, so far as I can recall. So when I told you that I found aspects of the genetic annihilation theory to be accurate and other aspects I disagree with, that is not inconsistent with my views on her views regarding homosexuality, which I do think are pseudoscientific. Now, you can say, well, how can you know that? You don't have a doctorate.
Pseudoscientific bullshit. Pseudoscientific bullshit.
It is pseudoscientific.
Pseudoscientific
it is
bullshit. That's what you said. That's what you said.
And if you'll let me finish, the reason that I say that, and I have every right to say it, even though I do not have a doctorate, keep in mind, Dr. Welsing is not a biologist. She is a psychiatrist. The issue of homosexuality in the animal kingdom is a biological issue, not a psychiatric one. So neither she nor I are biologists trained to make that statement. But you know what? The theories that are accepted in the community of biologists would suggest that anyone who thinks that homosexuality is not seen throughout the animal kingdom is full of crap. That would go for her or anyone else who thinks that to be true. In addition, I would suggest she is a psychologist or psychiatrist, and the American Psychological Association and the entire field of psychiatry has said as a matter of their clinical practice that homosexuality is not considered deviant or dysfunctional. It is, in fact, a normative behavior throughout the animal kingdom. That is the official position of the professional associations to which she belongs. So in other words, it isn't just Tim Wise saying that that belief is bullshit. It is the entire discipline of which she is a part. So it isn't about who's got a PhD and who is a clinician and who is a doctor and who isn't. There are literally millions of doctors, including non-white ones, plenty of them, all of whom believe, and the organizations to which her profession belongs all believe as a matter of official policy that her position on that is incorrect. So it isn't about, oh, Tim with his BA is saying that, and she wouldn't know any better, or she would know better because she has this degree or that degree. Those degrees have nothing to do with whether biologically homosexuality exists throughout the animal kingdom, which it does.